All right, thank you so much. Welcome to another episode of the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. My name is Fred Diamond. Of course, I'm the author of Love, Hope, Lyme, what family members, partners, and friends who love a chronic Lyme survivor need to know. And even though I'm going to be speaking to a doctor, Dr. Melanie Stein here in a few minutes, I want to let people know that today's show is not a replacement for medical care. If you're struggling with chronic Lyme disease, tick-borne disease, and things related to it, please seek proper medical care. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much. Give us a thumbs up, leave a question, make a comment. Dr. Stein and I will look at all your comments and get through to you. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. And also my book, Dr. Stein, I've given out over 5,000 free copies of the book, the PDF, I should say. So if you're a chronic Lyme survivor, if you'd like the electronic copy, please reach out to me via any social media. My book is on Amazon. Please feel free to reach out. And Dr. Stein, your new book, Breaking Through Chronic Illness, the Science of Cellular Repair and the Path to Lasting Recovery, is also on Amazon. I encourage people to get up and check it out. Go up to Amazon and check it out. It's a great book. Congratulations
Thank you.
on publishing it. We're talking today with Dr. Melanie Stein, and I want to let people know I met Dr. Stein. We met at the ILADS conference. We're doing today an infectious or International Lyme and Associated Disease Society, their annual scientific conference. We're doing today's interview in October of 2025, if you're listening sometime in the future. And I'm glad, Dr. Stein, that we had a chance to meet at the conference because we talked for a while and, we got deep into why you wrote the book. Again, you're based up in Oregon, Portland, Oregon, and how you treat and why you wrote the book and why you treat. And I'm glad we had that conversation because we broke through some things that we really want to focus on. So I'm excited about that. So introduce yourself to the audience and tell us how you serve Lyme survivors.
Yeah. Thanks, Fred. I'm really excited to be here today, and thanks for everything you're doing for the community as well. So as everyone mentioned, as Fred mentioned, I'm Dr. Melanie Stein. I practice in Portland, Oregon, and my journey into treating complex chronic illness and Lyme disease, it was kind of a hard one. I have more of your typical Lyme disease journey where I actually woke up one day paralyzed. I was on a Qigong retreat out in Trout Lake, Washington, and I woke up one day and I could not move my legs and I had full upper body tremors. Um, it was a really hard journey from there. I was taken to the hospital where I underwent a battery of tests. And, they basically told me there was nothing wrong with me. I couldn't move my legs, I couldn't stand up, I had tremors, but there was nothing wrong with me. And, they brought neuropsychologists in to my room to tell me, what's going on? Why are you choosing to do this? We need to talk about this. And, I was actually in medical school at the time. And I told them, what do you mean? Why am I choosing to do this? I have things to do. Right. And it was really hard, but I went through the ringham and rhythm and I ended up in a rehab facility to learn how to live in a wheelchair, still with no answers. And a couple days into my stay there, I actually developed a bullseye rash. And, having been in medical school, I was like, I have acute Lyme paralysis, right? I need antibiotics. This is great, right? I'm not crazy after all, because I think after how much they had therapists and psychologists coming and talk to me, I started to really question my sanity. Um, and so, you would think that, oh, I had a bullseye rash, that meant I was going to get help. And I'll never forget the doctor coming in and talking to me. He was an infectious disease doctor. And he said, well, we don't have any Lyme disease here in Oregon, so this can't be Lyme disease. And, I don't know what's going on. And I said, what do you mean? Like, you can't figure out what's going on with me. And, at that point, I knew I needed to get out of there. Right. I needed to get out of this rehab facility. And luckily enough, my naturopathic physician already was treating Lyme. It wasn't her full specialty, but she was treating Lyme, and she got me on, IV antibiotics right away. That's kind of standard of care for acute Lyme paralysis. And, it was a several year journey. with various different treatments. I was in a wheelchair for about 4 or 5 years, went into a walker, went into a cane after that, with numerous different treatments and protocols. And ultimately, I did begin to feel better and I did begin to live a better quality of life until COVID hit. And when COVID hit, I had a thriving practice at this point, treating patients with Lyme disease. But I got COVID really bad and I started to have seizures 20 times a day. And at that point, I ran another IGenics panel to see what was going on with my tick-borne stuff. And sure enough, it was flared and tried antibiotics, tried all the best treatments, and nothing worked. Nothing was getting me better. And it was when I took that step back and I really started to think about what was happening in my body at this deeper level, what was happening at this cellular level. And I started a therapy I was already doing some of in my practice, but has now since then become the cornerstone of my practice. And why I wrote this book is we need to heal ourselves on a cellular level.
Wow. So people are listening, and a couple of things that you hit on. You were in medical school. So you're being trained to be a doctor, and a doctor
Mhm.
comes into your room later on and says, "Yeah, we don't have Lyme disease in Oregon." And as a matter of fact, I did a show recently with a professor at Virginia Tech University who talked about the spread of chronic disease. That's what she studies. Her
Mhm.
name is
Mhm.
Dr. Karine Kalivras, and how Lyme spread from where people think it just is, but gets on bird wings and deer, migratory animals who move around. And the one thing that people who are listening to this know that, yeah, we might not have Lyme and Argon, which we do, but did you recently go to the Ozarks? It's like a lot of those
Right.
kinds of questions. I talked to a lot of people from Texas where you and I met in person, and so many of them said that they believe that they got the disease in the Ozarks, right? It's everywhere now. Again, we're doing today's interview in October of 2025. Uh, Tell people more a little bit about, you mentioned, again, I'm calling you Dr. Melanie Stein. For people who are listening, tell us about your practice. Tell us what you do. What kind of a
Mhm.
doctor are you? Give people a little background into that.
Yeah, so I'm a naturopathic physician in Portland, Oregon. My clinic's name is Restorative Health Clinic. And, I view it as a really special place because after my experience, when I created the clinic, I wanted to create an environment where no patient went left unheard. So, we specialize in vector borne illness. A lot of my patients do have Lyme disease. We also specialize in environmental toxicity, autoimmune diseases, and neurodegenerative disorders.
Wow. So let's get a little bit deeper into what you just said before. So, yes, you see a bullseye rash, and in theory, you take a couple weeks of antibiotics and you should be recovered. And many of us know that isn't necessarily the case, and
Mhm.
hence, chronic illness, etc. So many patients try antibiotics, they try herbs, they do various types of detoxes, but they're still stuck. So what's actually happening? You mentioned the cellular level. What's actually happening to the body during chronic Lyme that makes recovery so difficult? And why have you seen that a lot of these treatments just fall short?
Yeah. We have to really break it back down to the cell. The cell controls everything in our body. It controls communication, it controls what can come in, our nutrients, how we make hormones, proteins, and get rid of toxins. And when we have, a lot of different infections or environmental toxins that enter our body, our cells break down and they no longer work. And, I really believe that we can give all the best antibiotic treatments. We have so many great treatments, herbal therapies. But if our cells are not able to communicate and they're not able to actually get rid of things, nothing works.
So one of the challenges with getting a disease like Lyme disease is it impacts so much of the body. And in almost some cases, it gets so complex, and you're just a person trying to live a life, raise a family, whatever it might be in a relationship, have a job, care for whatever it might be. And now you have this complex disease that you have to figure out, how do you treat yourself and care for. Talk a little bit. as I hate to say as basic as you can, but so that people understand what does rebuilding the cellular level look like? Because we've talked about this a couple of times on the Love Hope Line podcast, that it really gets down to the cellular level. But talk about what does it mean? What does rebuilding at the cellular level look like? And how can it help patients start moving forward through recovery?
Right. So if you imagine your cells surrounded by a wall, right? Like the wall of our house, the job of the wall of that house is to keep foreign invaders out, right? To protect us from the elements, protect us from rain, right? The roof of our house. And if we think of the walls and the roof of our house, they're actually these fats, right? And these fats need to be very nicely organized, right? Kind of like brick and mortar. If there's a hole in the mortar, if there's a shingle loose, water is going to come in and flood your house. And so, as we are infected by tick-borne disease and oxidative stress comes in the body, we start to crumble those walls and those walls start to break down. And when that happens, that communication can't occur. We can't tell our body from cell to cell that an invader's here. We can't mount that immune response. And so, cell membrane therapy, which is the therapy that I do in my practice, is actually healing the architecture of the building and healing the cell membranes.
I want you to give our listeners some advice on what they should do before they come to see you, right?
Mhm.
So, I see a lot of times on social media, someone will post, does anybody have any recommendations on Dr. Smith in Cleveland or whatever it might be? It's a hypothetical doctor I'm just making up. And then someone says, saved my life. And then someone said, didn't help me at all. Then someone says, best thing I ever did. Then someone said, was a waste of time and money. Give some advice, Dr. Melanie Stein, on what is your advice for Lyme survivors before they come to you, before they come to the doctor? I told some people, write down everything, write down as many things as you can, because, you're not a magician, right? You're someone who wants to help the patients. Give advice to patients, to Lyme survivors on what they need to do before they come to you so that you can help them.
Yeah. I mean, Fred, you hit the nail on the coffin right there. Exactly. I tell my patients, write down your health history in as much detail as you possibly can. Whether or not it's you draw a line and then you're doing little lines of timelines, whether or not you're writing a whole paragraph, I'll read it. If it's pages, I'll read it. Maybe not before the visit, but at least right after the visit to put everything in context. Because, our cells, when they break down, that is what a symptom is. And those symptoms are sending us messages. And we need to listen to those and we need to put all the puzzle pieces together to actually figure out what's going on. So if my patient, if they come to their first visit prepared with, all of their labs nicely organized for me so I can quickly flip through them and this nice timeline. I mean, short bullet points are better with a line so I can look at this timeline and look at how did you get sick? What have you tried? What did that do? What did that not do? That allows me to really begin to put this complex picture together faster.
So let's get into your mind to help, conversely, the Lyme survivors.
Mhm.
So, patient does that. They come with what we just recommended, your history, your labs, all those kinds of things. So help Lyme survivors understand what you're thinking about when they come to your clinic. How do you, Dr. Melanie Stein, or every doctor, how should you start putting the pieces together? What do you look for first? What are you thinking? How do you map out their road to recovery?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I always tell people start in childhood on the timeline. And I want to know, how was your health in childhood? Did you get chronic ear infections and strep infections? How was your relationship with your parents, right? Were you bullied a lot in school? What was your stress level like as a child? All of that influences our immune system development over time, right? I want to know when you first got sick. What was happening in your life at the time? What was that very first symptom that you remember? Did your symptoms start slow? Did they come on fast? Where have you lived in your life? What states have you lived in? Have you had any mold exposures? Did you live in, next to, I have a patient right now who lived next to a big toxic power plant up in Seattle, and we're finding a lot of different heavy metals as a, cause that she's not getting better from her Lyme. And, So I want to hear all of these different things about your life. And then I want to hear what doctors you've seen. What did they do for you? What were the results of the treatments that you did? If it was nothing, that's okay. But if you had a tiny little improvement, I want to know about that tiny little improvement. And as we do that, we can start to kind of put this piece together. I have this diagram that I show my patients of this bucket that's just overflown. And once we put these pieces together, we can start to figure out, okay, where do we start? What piece do we need to start peeling off first?
We didn't really discuss this question ahead of time, but based on what you just said, I once, when I was first doing my research for Lyme disease to understand how someone once in my life was affected, I listened to a lecture by a now retired, well-known Lyme Literate medical doctor who spoke for about 59 minutes on, various things, co-infections, blah, blah, blah. And I knew most of what he was talking about because I had just read a whole bunch of books. At the 59th minute, this particular doctor said, and oh, by the way, if you don't deal with unresolved childhood trauma, you're never going to cure yourself from chronic Lyme disease. And I was like, oh my God, that's a pretty important point. And then he said, thank you so much. Good night. It was the end of this 1 hour webinar. Again, we didn't discuss this question ahead of time. You may not know the
Mhm.
answer, but you brought it up. You want to understand what
Mhm.
your patients have gone through. Are you capable of talking about that for a little bit?
Yeah, I think I can to an extent. I don't know if you've ever read the book The Body Keeps Score, but it's a really good book about how when traumas and emotions happen to us, we hold them in different areas of our body. And I think that, when we have these unresolved traumas or unresolved stressors in our life, it's another way that inflammation is created in our body. And so, really taking a step back and making sure that we're dealing with the mental emotional side of this. I know for me in my own healing journey, I had some unresolved trauma with my parents. And it was when I really took a step back and I healed my relationship with my father, that doors started to open for me that I didn't know were even closed. And pain started to lift in my body. I really believe in the energetics of the body. And so releasing that trauma, healing that relationship in whatever form that needs to look like for you, maybe that's even through limbic system work, right? So maybe it's not healing this unresolved trauma with these people directly, but how do we tell our body that we're safe again, right? Because it's so easy. I know for me, I couldn't stand up. I remember trying to just go to the bathroom. And it's so easy to start to get to this place where we don't trust our bodies. And so, really learning you are safe in your body, you're safe emotionally, and you're safe physically.
Well, that's a great answer. One of the books that I read is called The Emotion Code, which
That's a good book too.
that's a great book too. I read in the summer of 2021 every Lyme book that there was, and someone recommended that I read that book, which answered a lot of those questions. It all comes down to inflammation. Um, Breaking through chronic illness, the science of cellular repair and the path to lasting recovery. Just kind of curious, beyond treatment itself, what are some everyday choices or environmental factors that you have found most important for patients to sustain their healing long term? I live in Northern Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C., and within 10 miles of where I am is the data center epicenter of the planet. It's where AOL was founded, and they're building a new data center all over. It's Loudoun County, Virginia, Ashburn, not far from Dulles Airport, and it's causing a lot of concern. So I'm just kind of curious on some of your
Yeah.
thoughts.
I mean, rightfully so. EMFs can really disrupt our body a lot. And, I think on the most foundational level, right, a choice that we can actually make. There's a lot of things in life we can't control, such as what's going on in DC, but what we can control is what we put into our body. Right. And so, even just at the most fundamental level, choosing to eat nutrient dense, grown or well raised meats, free of pesticides, free of GMOs. I, personally really believe in a high fat diet because of the cell membrane health. And so eating really good, healthy fats, healthy meats, healthy nuts and seeds, eggs, and lots and lots of vegetables to make sure we're getting all of our B vitamins. But then another way, is meditation. Making sure that we're giving ourselves that time every day to calm our nervous systems down, right? We can't help it. We live in a stressful world. We have a lot of stresses, regardless of what we do to try to avoid them. And so, taking a couple minutes, just 2, 3 minutes, even every day, to just breathe and calm that nervous system down can enter that healing sympathetic state. And then another thing I tell my patients is movement. You
Mm,
know, moving your body, it can be slow. It doesn't
mm,
have to be this rigorous exercise. I hear from my chronic Lyme patients all the time, even just walking to the mailbox was a
mm.
lot. So, okay, don't walk to the mailbox, right? But just do anything you can to get some sort of movement, because movement helps heal our mitochondria, make that good ATP, that good energy in the body, brings oxygen to the tissues, to really just create a healthy environment in our body.
Yeah. So once again, Dr. Melanie Stein, breaking through chronic illness, the science of cellular repair, and the path to lasting recovery. Before I ask you for your final thought, first of all, congratulations on the book, and people can get it on Amazon. I've seen it on Amazon, and I strongly encourage that people read it. Just want to acknowledge you for what you're doing, and it's just amazing that you were a medical student and a doctor came in and said to you, "We don't have Lyme disease in Oregon," and you're sitting there going through what you've gone through. And my apologies, I call it Oregon. I know it's Oregon, I guess, but it's just one of my little quirks. I'm just kind of curious for listeners, people listening to today's Love Hope Line podcast who feels exhausted, they're in pain, they're struggling because things don't work, um, and they've tried quote unquote everything. How can they begin to advocate for themselves with everybody, doctors, family, friends? And I loved your answer before about what should they bring to you when they first meet the doctor.
Mhm.
What's the first step that they can
Yeah.
take to begin shifting their health in the right direction?
Yeah. I think the first thing is to remind yourself that you're not broken, right? Our bodies can heal. And there are so many wonderful doctors out there that will listen. You just have to find them. iLads, you mentioned iLads, we're a great resource with our organization. I've never been to a conference with so many just like minded doctors, but I think that it can be really hard to be vulnerable when we're sick. And we feel like we need to put on this show every day that, hey, we're going to go to work and we're going to be okay. And, it's an invisible illness, right? And so my biggest advice to people is to be vulnerable and don't stop being vulnerable, right? Be vulnerable with your friends, be vulnerable with your family. Tell them what you're experiencing and what's going on, because they don't know unless you tell them. And then with your doctors, you might have that doctor, unfortunately, that
Mm.
does dismiss you, but don't give up. Keep looking, because there's so many doctors out there like myself that will hear you.
Yeah, that's a great point. Again, we're doing today's interview in October of 2025. And you're right, at iLads, there are so many caring, compassionate doctors, and there are a lot of doctors out there. And I encourage you to find them. All right, Dr. Melanie Stein, thank you so much for all the great insights, great information. Is there any final thought, anything you want to leave us with today?
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing I just want to leave everyone with is you will get better and you
Mm.
can get better. I know it can feel hopeless at times, I was there too. But continue to fight and continue to look for answers, because the body just is giving us messages of what it needs. And when we stop and when we listen to those messages, that's when healing starts.
All right, very good. Once again, Dr. Melanie Stein. The book is Breaking Through Chronic Illness. It's available on Amazon, wherever else you get your books. Again, if you're watching to this on YouTube, give us a thumbs up. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star review. My name is Fred Diamond. This is the Love Hope Lyme podcast.